The alarms were screaming before I even opened my eyes. Red light filled the cockpit of my scout ship, flashing across every panel, every dial, every warning symbol I had been trained to fear. My hands moved before my mind caught up, gripping the controls as the whole ship shuddered around me like it was trying to shake itself apart. Something had hit us, something big. "Daniel, we are losing altitude fast," said Lucas Bennett through the comlink, his voice tight with a fear he was trying to hide. He was my wingman, flying just behind me, and right now, his voice was the only steady thing in a world that had turned upside down. Pull up now." I tried. I pulled the controls back with everything I had, but the ship did not listen. Smoke poured from the left engine, thick and black, curling into the cabin through cracks that should not have existed. Below us stretched a planet we were never supposed to get this close to, a quarantined world wrapped in thick green forests and glowing blue rivers that looked almost alive in the moonlight. This was Vale territory. Nobody from Earth had set foot here in 10 years. Nobody who tried had come back to tell the story. "Lucas, get clear," I shouted into the comm, my voice cracking under the pressure of the dive. "Do not follow me down. That is an order." "Daniel, do not do this to me," he said, and I could hear the pain in his words, the kind of pain that comes from watching a friend fall and knowing there is nothing you can do to stop it. The ground came up fast, too fast. I saw the tree line rushing toward me, a wall of dark green that filled my entire window, and I had just enough time to brace myself before the world exploded into fire and noise and pain. When I woke up, everything hurt. I was lying in the wreckage of my ship, half buried under twisted metal and broken glass. Smoke drifted upward through a hole in the hull, carrying the smell of burning wires and scorched earth. My ears were ringing so loudly I could barely hear my own breathing. I tried to move my legs first, and they responded, slow and stiff but working. Then I looked down at my side and saw the blood. A long, deep wound ran across my ribs where a piece of the control panel had torn through my flight suit. It was not the kind of wound that kills you fast, but it was the kind that kills you slow if nobody finds you in time. And out here, on a planet marked as forbidden on every star chart in the fleet, nobody was coming to find me. I pressed my hand against the wound and pushed myself up, gritting my teeth against the pain. My comm unit crackled uselessly, nothing but static answering every call I sent. Either Lucas had been forced to retreat, or something on this planet was jamming every signal I tried to send. Neither option gave me much comfort. I forced myself to think clearly. Panic would not keep me alive. Training would. The first thing I needed was to move away from the wreckage before it caught fire completely. The second thing I needed was somewhere to hide, somewhere I could slow the bleeding and figure out what to do next. I grabbed the small medical kit from my flight suit, the only piece of equipment that had survived the crash intact, and stumbled out through the broken hull into the forest beyond. The trees here were unlike anything I had ever seen. Tall and silver-barked, they stretched high above me, their leaves glowing faintly with a soft blue light that pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat. The whole forest seemed to breathe around me, quiet and alive, in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. This was not a dead world. This was a world that belonged to someone else. I walked as far as my strength allowed, pressing a strip of cloth against my wound, leaving a thin trail of blood behind me that I knew I could not hide. Every step sent pain shooting through my side, and every few minutes I had to stop and lean against a tree just to catch my breath. That was when I heard it. A low humming sound, coming from somewhere ahead of me, deep and resonant, like 1,000 voices singing the same single note. I froze, my back pressed against the trunk of a glowing tree, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give away my position on its own. The humming grew louder, and with it came movement in the shadows, shapes gliding between the trees, too smooth and too quiet to be anything I recognized. I had read the reports. Every soldier in the fleet had. The Vale Swarm was not a species we fought in open battle. They were something else entirely, something we barely understood. A collective mind spread across countless bodies, all connected, all aware of each other in ways human science could not explain. We avoided this world not because we were afraid of losing a fight, but because nobody who came close enough to study them ever returned with real answers. And now I was standing in the middle of their home, bleeding, unarmed, and completely alone. I thought about running, but running was pointless. My legs were shaking. My vision was starting to blur at the edges, and I could feel the blood soaking through the cloth I had pressed against my side. If I ran, I would collapse within minutes and be found anyway, only weaker and more helpless than I already was. So instead, I did the only thing that made sense in that moment. I stood still and waited. The shapes in the shadows drew closer, and slowly, they resolved into forms I could recognize, though nothing about them felt entirely real. They stood taller than me, their bodies covered in smooth, dark plating that shimmered faintly with the same blue light as the trees around us. Their eyes, if that was even the right word for them, glowed with a soft, steady light, watching me without blinking, without moving, as if they were waiting for me to make the first mistake. I raised my hands slowly, showing them I carried no weapon. It was a gesture I was not sure they would understand, but it was the only language I had left to speak. The tunnel entrance opened behind them without warning, a wide gap in the earth lined with the same glowing blue light, pulsing gently like something breathing far beneath the surface of the planet. The shapes moved aside, forming a path toward the opening, and though every instinct in my body told me to refuse, I understood with a strange and sudden clarity that I did not have a choice. I stepped forward, my wound burning with every movement, and walked into the tunnel. The air inside was warmer than I expected, thick with a strange sweetness that reminded me faintly of rain on dry earth. The walls curved around me in smooth, organic shapes, glowing softly enough to light my way without blinding me. The humming sound grew louder as I walked deeper, joined now by other sounds, clicks and low tones that seemed to shift and change, as if they carried meaning I simply could not grasp. My strength was fading fast. Each step felt heavier than the last, and the edges of my vision kept darkening, threatening to pull me down into unconsciousness. I stumbled once, catching myself against the tunnel wall, and felt a jolt of something strange pass through my palm, where it touched the surface, almost like the wall itself had noticed me. I do not know how long I walked. Time seemed to stretch and blur the way it does in dreams, every second feeling both instant and endless. But eventually, the tunnel opened into a massive chamber, so large that the ceiling disappeared into darkness far above me, and the walls curved outward in every direction, like the inside of a great shell. And there, at the center of that chamber, surrounded by a soft glow that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, waited something I had never expected to see with my own eyes. She was massive, easily 3 times my height, her body covered in plating that shifted between deep blue and soft silver, depending on how the light touched her. Unlike the smaller shapes that had led me here, she moved with a grace that felt almost impossible for something so large, every motion slow and deliberate, as if she had all the time in the universe, and no reason at all to rush. Her eyes, glowing a soft gold rather than the pale blue of the others, turned toward me the moment I entered the chamber. I felt the full weight of her attention settle over me like a physical pressure, and my legs finally gave out beneath me. I fell to my knees, my hand still pressed against my bleeding side, staring up at the being that every soldier in the fleet had spent a decade being warned to avoid. She did not attack. She did not call out to the shapes around her to end my life, though I fully expected her to. Instead, she simply watched me, tilting her head slightly, studying me, with an intensity that made me feel as though she could see far more than just the wound on my side. I opened my mouth to speak, though I had no idea what words could possibly matter in a moment like this. Nothing came out except a ragged breath, and then the darkness at the edges of my vision finally won, pulling me down into unconsciousness, as the last thing I saw was her massive form moving closer, one clawed hand reaching gently toward the wound on my side. I did not know it then, but that single moment, the moment her hand touched my ruined flight suit and paused over the blood-soaked cloth beneath it, was the moment everything I thought I understood about this war, about this planet, and about myself, was about to change forever. I woke to warmth. Not the warmth of fire or sunlight, but something gentler. A soft heat that seemed to come from the very air around me, wrapping around my body like a blanket I had not asked for. For a moment I did not open my eyes, too afraid of what I might see, too afraid that the moment I looked, whatever mercy had kept me alive this long would disappear. When I finally forced my eyes open, I found myself lying on a raised surface made of the same smooth, organic material as the tunnel walls, curved gently to support my body. The wound on my side had been cleaned, and wrapped in something that looked nothing like the bandages in my medical kit. A thin, silvery film that clung to my skin and pulsed faintly, almost like it was alive. I sat up slowly, testing my strength, and found that the pain in my side had dulled to a distant ache, rather than the sharp agony I remembered. Whatever they had done to treat my wound, it was working better than anything human medicine could offer. The chamber around me was empty, except for the massive form standing near the far wall, her back turned toward me, as she studied something I could not see, a shifting pattern of light projected onto the curved surface in front of her. I stayed still, watching her, my mind racing through every possible reason she might have chosen to save my life instead of ending it. She turned, before I could decide on an answer, her golden eyes finding mine instantly, as though she had known the exact moment I woke up, without needing to look. "You are awake," she said, and the words landed in my mind, rather than my ears, smooth and clear despite the strange, layered quality behind them, like many voices speaking as one. I realized with a jolt that my old translation implant, the one installed for diplomatic missions years ago, and never removed, had somehow found a way to interpret her language after all this time. "You speak," I said, my voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "You speak our language." "I speak the language your mind understands," she corrected gently, moving closer with slow, deliberate steps. "It is not the same thing." I pushed myself further upright, keeping one hand pressed lightly against the bandage on my side, watching her approach with a caution I could not shake no matter how gentle her voice sounded. Every report I had ever read about the Veil Swarm painted them as something closer to a force of nature than a species capable of conversation. Nothing had prepared me for this. "Why did you save me?" I asked. It was the only question that mattered, the only thing standing between me and any hope of understanding what was happening. She did not answer right away. Instead, she knelt beside the raised surface I sat on, bringing her massive form down to something closer to my level, and reached out one clawed hand toward my side. I flinched instinctively, but she paused, waiting for me to allow it, and only continued when I forced myself to stay still. Her claw traced gently along the edge of the bandage, following the line of the wound beneath it, and then moved slightly higher, to an old, faded scar just above my ribs, one I had carried since childhood, long before I ever joined the fleet. It was a mark from a fall I barely remembered, a story my mother used to tell about a stubborn boy who climbed too high and paid the price. The moment her claw touched that old scar, something changed in her. I felt it before I understood it, a shift in the air around us, a stillness that fell over the chamber, like the whole world had suddenly gone quiet. The soft hum that had followed me since I arrived, the constant background noise of the hive, faltered for just a moment, as if every mind connected to hers had felt the same shock at once. "This mark," she said, her voice dropping into something softer, something almost reverent. "This is not from the crash." "No," I said carefully, watching her expression, though I was not entirely sure her kind had expressions the way I understood them. "That is old, from when I was a child." She stared at the scar for a long moment, her golden eyes narrowing slightly, as though she were reading something written into my skin that I could not see myself. Then she looked up at my face, studying my features with an intensity that made my skin crawl, not from fear exactly, but from the sense that she was searching for something specific, something she desperately needed to find. "Your eyes," she murmured, almost to herself. "Your bones, the shape of your hands." "What are you talking about?" I asked, my patience wearing thin, despite the fear still coiled tight in my chest. "What is happening here? Why does a scar from when I was a child matter to you?" She rose to her full height again, turning away from me for a moment, and I watched her shoulders rise and fall in something that looked remarkably like the deep breath a person takes when they are trying to steady themselves before saying something important. 10 generations, she said finally, still facing away from me. 10 generations my people have watched for this mark. I did not believe I would see it in my own lifetime. "What mark?" I pressed, sliding carefully off the raised surface, testing my legs beneath me. They held, shaky, but steady enough to stand. "I do not understand what you are seeing that I cannot." She turned back to face me, and for the first time since I had woken in this chamber, I saw something in her golden eyes that looked almost like disbelief, The same expression I imagined might cross my own face if I witnessed something I had spent my entire life believing was impossible. "There was one before you," she said slowly, choosing her words with obvious care, perhaps aware that whatever she was about to tell me would shatter everything I thought I understood about this war, about this planet, and about the decade of silence between our two peoples. "One of your kind, long before your fleet ever reached these stars. One who carried the same mark you carry now." I felt a chill run through me, despite the warmth of the chamber. "That is not possible," I said. "Humanity did not have interstellar travel until 50 years ago. Nobody from Earth could have been here before that." "And yet," she said, moving closer again, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to keep looking into her eyes. "Here you stand, carrying the same mark, the same blood, the same shape, as the one who came before. I did not search for you because you are human. I searched for you because you are theirs." The words hit me harder than the crash had, harder than the pain in my side, harder than anything I had experienced since the moment my ship went down in flames. I opened my mouth to argue, to insist that she was mistaken, that this had to be some kind of misunderstanding, born from desperation, or grief, or whatever emotion drove her people to keep watch for 10 generations, over a mark on a stranger's skin. But before I could speak, she reached out again, this time placing her open palm gently against my chest, just above the wound she had treated, just above the old scar that had somehow become the center of everything happening around me. "I found you," she whispered, and the words seemed to echo through the chamber itself, carried outward, through whatever connection bound her mind, to the countless others sharing this hive. "After all this time, I found you." I stood frozen beneath her hand, my heart pounding against my ribs, staring into eyes that held something I could not name, something that looked almost like relief, almost like grief, almost like 10 generations of waiting finally reaching their end. Outside the chamber, I could hear the hum of the hive shifting, rising and falling in patterns that felt less like background noise now, and more like a conversation happening all around me, a message passing from mind to mind faster than any signal my ship's comm system could have carried. Something had changed the moment she spoke those words. I could feel it in the air, in the light, in the way the shapes gathered just beyond the chamber entrance began to move closer, drawn by whatever news had just spread through their connected minds. I did not know yet what it meant to be found, or what it would cost me to learn the truth behind her words. But I understood, standing there in that glowing chamber with her hand resting over my heart, that I was no longer just a downed pilot waiting to be executed or interrogated. I had become something else entirely, something tied to a history I knew nothing about, a history that stretched back further than my own species understood, hidden beneath the silence of 10 years of quarantine and fear. Whatever came next, I knew there was no going back to the simple truth I had believed when I woke up that morning, back before my ship had ever left the safety of open space. She did not explain herself right away. Instead, she asked me to sit again, and this time she lowered herself to the ground beside me, her massive form curling in a way that reminded me strangely of a parent settling in to tell a child a bedtime story, except nothing about what followed felt small or simple. "You carry questions," she said. "I will try to answer them. But some answers are easier shown than spoken." "Shown how?" I asked, still wary, still aware that I was sitting inside the heart of a hive that had been marked forbidden territory for an entire decade of my life. "Memory," she said simply. "Not mine alone, ours. All of us together remember what happened here. Long before your fleet knew these stars existed. I can share that memory with you, if you allow it." I hesitated. Every instinct I had built over years of training told me to refuse, to protect my mind from whatever influence a creature like her might have over it. But I thought about the scar on my side, the 10 generations she had spoken of, the strange certainty in her voice when she said the words that had shaken the entire hive around us. I needed to understand, even if understanding meant taking a risk I could not fully calculate. "Show me," I said. She reached toward my temple with one clawed finger, gentle despite its size, and the moment she touched my skin, the chamber around me dissolved into light. I was standing somewhere else entirely, though my body remained where it was. The world around me looked like the same planet, the same silver trees glowing with soft blue light, but the tunnels were smaller, rougher, carved by hands, rather than grown the way the current hive seemed to be. I understood somehow, without being told, that I was witnessing the past, centuries removed from the moment I had crashed into this forest. A man stumbled through the trees, dressed in clothing unlike anything I recognized from any fleet uniform, patched and worn, clearly built for survival rather than combat. His face was lined with exhaustion, his steps unsteady, and across his side ran a wound eerily similar to the one I had carried when I first entered this hive. I felt my breath catch, watching him collapse against the same kind of glowing tree I had leaned against not long ago. His name was Edmund Hale, the Queen's voice said, though I could not see her anywhere in this vision, her words simply present in my mind the way they had been since we first spoke. A settler, separated from a small expedition that reached this world generations before your fleet, believed interstellar travel possible. His people came in secret, testing technology your history books never recorded, technology later lost when their journey ended in failure. I watched as smaller shapes, ancestors of the drones that had led me into the hive, emerged from the shadows around him, much as they had done for me. Edmund raised his hands weakly, too injured to run, too exhausted to fight, offering no resistance as they surrounded him. He expected death, the Queen continued, as you did. Instead, he found something else. The vision shifted, moving forward, through what felt like weeks, compressed into moments. I saw Edmund inside a chamber, similar to the one I currently sat in, though rougher, less refined, tended by shapes that moved around him, with careful curiosity, rather than open hostility. I saw him slowly learning to communicate, first through simple gestures, then through patterns of light and sound that grew more complex with each passing scene. Your ancestor did not come to conquer, the Queen said. He came because his own people had abandoned him, injured and left behind during an emergency evacuation, when their outpost came under threat from forces neither of us remember clearly anymore. We were young then too, our hive small, vulnerable, still learning what it meant to survive on this world. He taught us things. We taught him things. It became something neither side expected. The vision showed me seasons passing, Edmund growing stronger, more comfortable among the hive, his relationship with them evolving from prisoner to something closer to family. I watched him kneel beside an earlier version of the Queen, smaller than the one who sat beside me now, teaching her words in a language I recognized as an old form of English, patient and careful the way someone teaches a language to someone they have grown to care for deeply. There came a threat, the Queen said, and her voice grew heavier, carrying weight I could feel pressing against my chest, even though this was only memory. A great sickness, spread through the deep tunnels, something that threatened to destroy everything we had built. Edmund used knowledge from his own people, medicine and methods we did not possess, to save us. It cost him greatly. The vision shifted again, and I saw Edmund growing weaker, his hair turning gray far too quickly, his body showing signs of exposure to whatever sickness he had worked to cure. Yet even as his strength faded, he continued working, refusing to stop until the threat had passed entirely, until the hive around him was safe once more. He knew he would not live to see his own people again, the Queen said softly. He had made his choice long before that final sickness took him. He chose us. And before he died, he made us a promise, one we have carried for 10 generations since. The vision brought me to a final scene, Edmund lying in a chamber not unlike the one I currently occupied, surrounded by shapes that mourned him in ways I had never expected creatures like this capable of, a slow, sorrowful hum, filling the air around his failing body. The young Queen from that era knelt beside him, much as the current Queen knelt beside me now, and I watched her place her hand gently over his chest. My blood will return, Edmund whispered, his voice barely audible even within the memory itself. Someday, someone carrying what I carry will find their way back to you. When that day comes, trust them, protect them, and let them know the truth your people and mine forgot to share. The vision faded, the light around me dissolving back into the familiar glow of the chamber, and I found myself blinking against tears I had not realized were forming. The Queen watched me carefully, her golden eyes searching my face for a reaction, waiting to see how I would respond to a truth that rewrote everything I understood about the history between our two peoples. That is why the scar matters, I said slowly, piecing everything together even as my mind struggled to accept it. It is a genetic marker, Something passed down through his bloodline. Yes, the Queen confirmed. We have watched for it across every generation since, hoping one of his descendants would someday find their way back to this world, carrying both the mark and the truth he asked us to preserve. 10 generations passed with no sign. I had begun to believe the promise would never be fulfilled. And then I crashed here, I said, the weight of the coincidence settling heavily over me. Except I realized it might not have been a coincidence at all. The fleet had been probing the edges of this quarantine zone for years, sending scout ships closer and closer despite the risks, driven by pressure from command, to understand why this world remained forbidden. Perhaps something deeper than luck had guided my ship toward this exact patch of forest. You carry his blood, the Queen said, rising to her feet once more, towering above me with a presence that felt entirely different now than it had when I first entered this chamber, wounded and terrified. You carry his mark, and whether you knew it or not, you carry the responsibility he left behind. What responsibility? I asked, standing as well, though my legs still felt unsteady beneath me, not entirely from the injury this time. What truth am I supposed to know? The Queen turned toward the chamber entrance, where I could see several of the smaller shapes gathered, watching quietly, waiting for something I did not yet understand. Beyond them, the hum of the hive continued its steady rhythm, but I noticed now that it carried a different quality than before, something closer to anticipation than the neutral background noise I had first mistaken it for. Your people believe we are dangerous, she said. A threat too great to approach, a mystery too costly to understand. That belief was not born from truth. It was born from fear, planted deliberately by those who benefited from keeping our two species apart. I frowned, trying to follow her meaning. Who would benefit from that? That is a question I cannot fully answer, she admitted. Our knowledge of your fleet's inner workings is limited to what little information passed between us and Edmund, and what fragments we have gathered since, through careful observation from a distance. But we know this. The quarantine placed on this world was not established because we attacked your people first. It was established after a single, brief encounter decades ago, one that ended badly through misunderstanding rather than malice, and the story told afterward painted us as monsters rather than acknowledge the mistakes made on both sides. I thought back to everything I had learned during my years in the fleet, every briefing, every warning about this world and its inhabitants. Nothing I had ever been told matched what she was describing. But then again, I had never questioned those briefings either. Never had reason to doubt information that came from command itself. If that is true, I said slowly, then the war we have been fighting, the reason this planet stays forbidden, all of it, might be built on a lie. Perhaps not a lie told with cruel intention, the Queen said. Perhaps simply a story shaped by fear and never corrected, because nobody survived long enough afterward to correct it, until now. The weight of her words settled over me like a physical thing, pressing down on shoulders, already carrying more than I had ever expected to bear. I had come to this planet as a soldier, following orders, doing my duty as best I understood it. Now I stood inside the heart of a hive my entire fleet had been trained to fear, learning that the history between our species ran far deeper and far more complicated than anyone back home could possibly imagine. Why tell me this now? I asked. Why not simply let me die in that forest, or keep me here as a prisoner without ever explaining any of it? The Queen's golden eyes softened slightly, and for the first time since I had woken in this chamber, I saw something in her expression that looked distinctly, undeniably kind. Because Edmund asked us to trust his blood when it returned, she said, and because I believe, watching you since the moment you stumbled into this chamber, wounded and afraid, yet still standing, rather than fleeing, that you might be exactly what he hoped you would become. Someone capable of carrying his truth back into the world that forgot it. I did not know how to respond to that. The responsibility felt impossibly large, far beyond anything I had trained for, far beyond anything a single scout pilot should reasonably be expected to carry. Yet standing there, surrounded by a hive that had waited 10 generations for this exact moment, I understood that refusing was no longer an option I could live with, even if I wanted to. Show me more, I said finally, my voice steadier than I expected. If I am going to carry this truth back, I need to understand everything. Not just what happened to Edmund, But what happened after? Why the encounter that led to the quarantine went wrong? Everything. The Queen nodded slowly, a gesture I recognized as approval, and reached toward my temple once more. "Then let me show you," she said, "what your people were never meant to see." The chamber dissolved into light again, and this time, I braced myself for whatever truth waited on the other side. This memory felt different from the first, sharper somehow, edged with a tension that had not been present when I watched Edmund's story unfold. I stood again in a version of this world removed from my own time, though closer to the present than before, close enough that I recognized the shape of a fleet shuttle resting in a small clearing, its design older than current models but unmistakably human. A small group of soldiers moved cautiously through the forest, weapons raised, their faces tight with the same fear I remembered feeling myself only a short while ago. I recognized the pattern of their movement, the careful formation, the same training I had gone through myself years later. This was a fleet scouting party, sent to investigate the very quarantine zone that would eventually be established because of what happened next. Shapes emerged from the trees, drones much like the ones who had first found me, moving with curiosity rather than aggression, drawn by the unfamiliar presence in their territory. I watched one soldier raise his weapon, his hand shaking, panic clear in every line of his posture. "They are not attacking," I said, unable to help myself even though I understood this was only memory. "Why is he raising his weapon?" "Fear does not always wait for confirmation of danger," the Queen's voice answered, carrying the same sorrow I had heard when she described Edmund's final moments. He believed he was protecting his people. He could not have known the drones approaching him carried no intention of harm. The soldier fired. The sound cracked through the memory like thunder, and the nearest drone fell, its light fading instantly. What happened next unfolded faster than I could process, the remaining drones reacting instinctively to protect themselves, the soldiers panicking further, weapons discharging in every direction, as the encounter spiraled into chaos within seconds. I watched, helpless, as the brief and brutal confrontation ended almost as quickly as it began, leaving destruction on both sides. The surviving soldiers retreated to their shuttle, and I understood, with a sinking feeling in my chest, that whatever report they filed afterward had shaped the fear that defined the next several decades of relations between our two species. "They told their commanders we attacked without warning," the Queen said as the vision faded. "They were not lying, not entirely. From their perspective, that may be exactly how it felt in the confusion of the moment. But the truth was simpler and sadder than that. Fear met curiosity, and curiosity paid the price." The chamber solidified around me once more, and I found myself standing unsteadily, processing everything I had just witnessed. The quarantine, the warnings, the decade of silence between our two peoples, all of it traced back to a single moment of misunderstanding that nobody had ever bothered to investigate further once the initial fear took hold. "This is why you never made contact again," I said slowly. "You were protecting yourselves from a threat you believed would keep returning." "We withdrew," the Queen confirmed. "We chose isolation over risking another encounter that might end the same way, or worse. It seemed the safer path, especially with Edmund's promise still unfulfilled, still waiting for the day his blood might return, to help mend what fear had broken." I ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady my thoughts against the enormity of what I had just learned. Everything I believed about this war, about the reasons behind the quarantine, about the nature of the beings standing before me now, had been built on a foundation of fear and misunderstanding, rather than genuine hostility. And somewhere above this planet, my own fleet remained convinced of exactly the opposite. A sudden change in the hum around us pulled my attention away from these thoughts. The steady rhythm that had filled the chamber since I arrived shifted abruptly, rising in pitch, carrying an urgency that even I, unfamiliar with their language, could recognize as alarm. The Queen's head turned sharply toward the chamber entrance, her golden eyes narrowing. "What is happening?" I asked, my training kicking back in, despite the emotional weight of everything else. "Your fleet," she said, her voice tightening with a concern I had not heard from her before. "Ships have entered orbit. Many ships. They believe you were captured. They are preparing to strike." My stomach dropped. Of course they would assume the worst. A scout pilot goes missing over quarantine territory. Contact lost. No distress signal received. And the only reasonable conclusion command would reach is that I had been taken, perhaps killed, by the very threat this quarantine had been established to contain. They would not wait for confirmation. They would act to prevent any possibility of intelligence loss, to prevent any risk of the Veil Swarm learning something from my capture that could be used against the fleet. "How long do we have?" I asked, already moving toward the chamber entrance, my mind racing through options that felt impossibly limited. "Minutes," the Queen said. "Perhaps less. Our sensors detect weapons charging in orbit, aimed at this location specifically. They know where the largest concentration of our hive resides." Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down, drawing on every ounce of training I had ever received. Panic would accomplish nothing. I needed a plan, and I needed it immediately. "I need to contact them," I said. "If I can get a message through, explain what is happening, they might stand down." "Your comm systems have been unable to function since you entered our territory," the Queen reminded me. "Our presence interferes with the frequencies your equipment relies upon." "Then help me," I said, turning to face her fully, meeting her golden eyes with a determination I did not fully feel, but desperately needed to project. "You have technology capable of things I do not understand. If there is any way to boost a signal, to reach my fleet before they fire, I need it now." The Queen studied me for a long moment, and I watched something shift behind her eyes, a decision forming, weighed against 10 generations of caution and fear that had kept her people isolated from mine. Finally she nodded, a sharp, decisive motion that carried none of the earlier hesitation. "There is a way," she said. "A relay chamber, deeper within the hive, capable of amplifying signals across vast distances. It was built long ago, in case Edmund's people ever returned to search for him. It has never been used." "Then let us use it now," I said. "Please." She moved quickly, for something so massive, leading me through winding tunnels that branched and curved in patterns I could not hope to memorize, deeper into the heart of the hive than I had yet traveled. Drones moved aside as we passed, their light flickering with what I now recognized as concern rather than mere curiosity, aware on some level of the danger closing in from orbit above. We reached the relay chamber within minutes, though it felt like hours given the urgency pressing against every second. The chamber itself was smaller than the one I had woken in, dominated by a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with light in complex shifting patterns, clearly some form of advanced technology far beyond anything I recognized from human engineering. "Place your hand here," the Queen instructed, gesturing toward a smooth section of the crystal. "It will read the frequency of your own comm implant, and use it as a foundation to build the signal." I did as she said, pressing my palm against the cool surface, and felt an immediate response, a faint vibration passing through my hand and up my arm, connecting somehow to the same implant that had allowed her language to reach my mind since the beginning. "Speak," she said. "Your words will carry, amplified far beyond what your own equipment could achieve alone." I closed my eyes for a moment, gathering my thoughts, aware that whatever I said in the next few minutes might determine not only my own fate, but the fate of an entire species that had spent 10 generations waiting for exactly this moment, the moment when Edmund's blood might finally return to correct a mistake that had cost so much on both sides. "This is Daniel Hart," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "Scout pilot, previously reported missing after engagement over the quarantine zone. I am alive. I have not been captured. I am asking, I am begging, that any fleet vessel in range hold fire and stand down from any strike currently being prepared." I paused, uncertain how much time I had, uncertain whether my message was even reaching anyone at all, but I pressed forward regardless, driven by the knowledge that hesitation now could cost everything. "The Veil Swarm did not attack me," I continued. "They saved my life after my ship went down. Everything we believe about this species, about the reasons behind this quarantine, is built on a misunderstanding that happened decades ago, a misunderstanding that has cost both our peoples more than anyone back home realizes. I have proof. I have history. I have truth that changes everything we thought we knew. Please, do not fire. Give me the chance to bring that truth back to you." The chamber fell silent except for the steady pulse of the crystal beneath my palm, carrying my words outward into the vast darkness above the planet, toward ships I could not see, toward commanders who held the power to end everything with a single order. I had no way of knowing whether my message had been received, whether it would even be believed if it reached anyone at all. The Queen stood beside me, her presence steady and calm despite the danger closing in from above, and I found myself drawing strength from that calmness, from the trust she had placed in me, despite everything her people had suffered through fear and misunderstanding. "Whatever happens next," she said quietly, "know that Edmund's promise has already been fulfilled. You have carried his truth this far. That alone matters, regardless of what comes after." I nodded, unable to find words adequate to the moment, and together we waited, watching the crystal pulse with light, listening for any sign that my message had reached the fleet in time to stop the destruction gathering in the darkness above us. The silence stretched unbearably long. I stood with my palm still pressed against the crystal, watching its light pulse steadily, wondering if my words had traveled far enough to matter, wondering if anyone in orbit had even heard them through whatever static and distortion the transmission might have suffered on its way through the atmosphere. Then, faintly at first, a voice crackled through the crystal itself, distorted but unmistakably human, carrying the kind of controlled tension I recognized instantly from years of fleet communication. "Unidentified signal. This is Colonel Grant Miller, aboard the fleet vessel Meridian. Repeat your identification and confirm your status." Relief flooded through me so suddenly my knees nearly buckled. "Colonel, this is Daniel Hart. I am transmitting from within Vale territory. I need you to hear everything I am about to say before you give any order to fire." There was a pause, long enough that I feared the connection had been lost, before the colonel's voice returned, tighter now, more urgent. "Hart, we have orbital weapons charged and locked on that location. Command believes you have been compromised. Give me a reason not to proceed with the strike." "Because everything we believe about this species is wrong," I said, forcing myself to speak clearly, despite the pressure squeezing my chest. "I have seen proof, Colonel. History that goes back centuries, long before our fleet ever developed interstellar travel. The quarantine was built on a single misunderstanding, a moment of panic that spiraled into tragedy because nobody investigated further once the fear took hold. The Vale swarm did not attack me. They saved my life. They have been protecting a promise for 10 generations, waiting for someone to return and correct the mistake that separated our two peoples in the first place." "That is a significant claim to make with limited time remaining," the colonel said, though I could hear something shifting in his tone, a crack in the certainty that had colored his voice moments before. "I know," I said, "but I would not risk everything on a lie, Colonel. You know my record. You know I do not make claims like this without reason. Please, give me the chance to bring this evidence back. If I am wrong, you can still act. But if I am right, and you fire now, you will be destroying something that could change everything between our species for the better." Another pause followed, shorter this time, and I imagined the colonel weighing impossible choices in the space of a few precious seconds, balancing protocol against the plea of a pilot he had trusted enough to send on this mission in the first place. "Hart," he said finally, "I am ordering a hold on the strike. You have 1 hour to reach a position where we can retrieve you safely. If anything changes, if we detect any hostile action from that location, the order resumes immediately. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said, my voice thick with a relief I could barely contain. "Thank you, Colonel." "Do not thank me yet," he replied. "Get back here and prove what you are telling me. The rest of the fleet will need more than words to change 10 years of policy." The connection faded, and I finally pulled my hand away from the crystal, turning to face the Queen, who had listened to the entire exchange with an expression I could only describe as cautious hope. Around us, the hum of the hive shifted once more, softening slightly, though the underlying tension remained, aware that danger had only been delayed rather than fully removed. 1 hour, I said. I need to reach a retrieval point, and I need proof strong enough to convince an entire fleet to reconsider a decade of fear. Then let us not waste the time we have been given, the Queen said, already moving toward the chamber entrance. What followed felt like a blur of motion and decision, the Queen guiding me swiftly through the tunnels while drones gathered materials and recordings from the deepest archives of the hive, fragments of memory captured in crystalline form that could be carried and shown to others the way she had shown them to me. She placed several small glowing shards into a pouch fashioned quickly from the same material as my medical bandage, pressing it into my hands with a solemn care that told me exactly how much this moment meant to her, and to every mind connected within her hive. "These carry fragments of everything I showed you," she said. "Edmund's arrival, his life among us, the encounter that led to the quarantine. It will not answer every question, but it will offer proof beyond your word alone." "It should be enough," I said, tucking the pouch securely against my chest, beneath what remained of my flight suit. "Colonel Miller respects evidence. If he sees this, if the fleet sees this, it could be the beginning of ending a war that never should have started in the first place." We reached the surface faster than I expected, emerging from the tunnel into daylight I had not seen since before the crash. The silver trees glowing softly even beneath the sun, the whole forest alive with the same quiet energy I had first mistaken for danger. A retrieval point had been designated not far from where my ship had gone down, and the Queen walked beside me the entire distance, her massive form drawing curious glances from smaller drones we passed, but no hostility, no hesitation. When we finally reached the clearing, where a fleet shuttle would soon arrive to pull me from this world, I turned to face her one last time, uncertain how to properly say goodbye to someone who had, in the span of a single day, completely reshaped my understanding of everything I once believed to be true. "I do not know what happens next," I admitted, "whether the fleet will believe this evidence, whether this changes anything at all in the long run. But I promise you, I will do everything in my power to make sure Edmund's promise means something, that his sacrifice and yours were not made in vain." The Queen studied me for a long moment, her golden eyes carrying the same intensity they had held since the very first time she looked upon my wound, back when I believed she might simply end my life without hesitation. Instead, she reached out one final time, resting her clawed hand gently against my chest, exactly where she had placed it before, exactly where she had first whispered the words that changed everything. 10 generations, she said softly. We waited, wondering if the promise would ever be fulfilled, wondering if the connection between our peoples was truly lost forever. "I did not expect to find you the way I did, wounded and afraid, stumbling through our forest with nothing left to offer but your own survival. Yet here you stand, carrying not only his blood, but his willingness to bridge what fear had broken." I felt something tighten in my throat, an emotion I had not expected to feel so strongly toward a being I had known for less than a full day, yet somehow it felt entirely natural, entirely earned, given everything we had shared in that short time. "I found you," she said again, the same words she had whispered when I first woke in her chamber, though they carried a different weight now, less like a discovery, and more like a promise, fulfilled after centuries of patient waiting. "You did," I said, meeting her eyes steadily, despite the ache building behind my own. "And I am glad you did. I found you too, and whatever comes next, I will not let this be forgotten again." In the distance, I heard the low rumble of an approaching shuttle, its engines cutting through the quiet hum of the forest, carrying with it the promise of return, of proof, of a chance to finally correct a mistake that had cost both our peoples more than anyone back home could ever fully understand. The Queen stepped back slowly, allowing space for the shuttle to land, though her eyes never left mine, watching with the same steady patience that had defined her people for 10 long generations. As the shuttle descended into the clearing, kicking up dust and scattering the glowing leaves around us, I gave her one last look, a silent promise passing between us that needed no words, no translation, nothing but the simple, shared understanding of two beings who had found something worth protecting in each other. The shuttle door opened, and Lucas Bennett's familiar face appeared, relief and disbelief warring across his features as he saw me standing there, alive, wounded but steady, with the entire clearing around me, glowing softly beneath a sun neither of us had expected me to see again. "Daniel," he said, stepping down carefully, his eyes flicking nervously toward the towering form of the Queen standing just beyond the tree line. "What happened to you down there?" I looked back once more at the being who had saved my life, who had shared a truth 10 generations in the making, who had whispered 3 simple words that changed everything I understood about this war, about history, and about the connection between two species that had spent far too long separated by fear. "I found something," I said quietly, stepping toward the shuttle, the pouch of glowing memories held securely against my chest. "Something that is going to change everything." And as the shuttle door closed behind me, carrying me away from that glowing forest and back toward a fleet that desperately needed to hear the truth I now carried. I understood that this was not an ending. It was only the beginning of a much longer journey, one that would require every bit of courage I had left, to make sure that this time, the connection between our two peoples would never be broken again.